Hey all, I'm Katie and welcome back to my channel. Now, as my channel name suggests, I am in the habit of occasionally buying some books. I think some people in my life would maybe describe it as a problem, but it's not a problem, it's just a challenge. But for the past year or two, I've really been trying to buy from more independent local bookstores. The more I've learned about a certain mega retailer, especially in how they undercut authors and just some of their business practices, the more I feel grossed out by that and want to take my business elsewhere. It costs a little bit more, but I feel like it's worth it. Plus, my mom has been managing small independent bookstores for my entire life. I literally practiced my alphabet by alphabetizing children's books in one of my mom's stores. A quick shout out to my mom. She still runs and manages an independent bookstore, the Basile History Market in downtown Indianapolis. It's part of the Indiana History Center, so it carries all things Indiana history, but not just things about Indiana history. They have a big selection of local authors, like the Ashfall trilogy by Mike Mullen, candy from places like Albanese and DeBrand, like Indiana brands. And then they also do a really fun celebration of Independent Bookstore Day every year. Last year, I got this dope stencil. It says, "The function of freedom is to free someone else." It's a Toni Morrison quote. Anyway, shout out to my mom. It's a dope store. You should check it out. All right, so today's video is a haul, and I have quite a few watchers who are not really a part of the BookTube community, so a haul is just like a collection of books that I purchased recently, and today I'm going to be focusing on books that I bought from small local bookstores. Hope you enjoy. First up, I have a couple of books that I picked up from the Breain Bookstore, which is a woman of color owned independent bookstore in South Bend, Indiana. The owner of the store, Kathy, is so sweet. And she's a former school librarian, which is my jam. I've only physically been to the store once, but thanks to the miracle of the internet, anyone can shop at any bookstore at any time, 24 hours a day. The first book I picked up from her was actually a pre-order. It's called First Comes Like by Alisha Rai. This is the third book in her Modern Love series, which are a series of contemporary romances that center around the internet and online dating and 21st century romance. This one is about a beauty guru named Mejia who gets involved in a fake dating situation with a Bollywood actor named Dev. Alisha Rai is a great proponent of diverse romances and calls out racism when she sees it in the romance community. She's a part of this new field of fierce Asian women romance authors, and I love her and I love these books and I can't wait to read it. All right, so next up from Breain, I picked up a little bit of a professional development book for me. I am a teacher and I run the Anti-Racist Book Club at my school, and this book was suggested as something we could potentially read as part of the book club, and I was like, wait a minute, I have never even heard of this book. It's called We Want to Do More Than Survive: Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom by Bettina L. Love. I've really been working hard to learn more about equity in education, so this sounds exactly like the book for me. I want to do it justice, so I'm just going to read you the first sentence of the description. It says, "Weaving together history, research, and personal stories, We Want to Do More Than Survive is a searing indictment of an educational system that is maintained by and profits from the suffering of children of color." Yup. Ready to read this, ready to have my mind blown. The last book I picked up from Breain is one of my most anticipated 2021 book releases, and that is 400 Souls, a community history of African America, 1619 to 2019, edited by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha and Blain. Now, I am a huge fan of Dr. Kendi, and I watch a lot of his media appearances. And whenever he talks about this project and being a part of it, he just like gushes. There are tons of fabulous contributors. I believe I counted them on the back of the book, and there's 92 different contributors. And each of them takes 5 years in the history of the United States and focuses on a topic of Black history that was relevant during that time. This seems like the opposite of let's learn about slavery and Martin Luther King Jr. and that's Black History Month. And I am so ready to learn more. Next up, I'm going to show you a couple of books that I purchased from Indie Reads via bookshop.org. So Indie Reads is an Indianapolis nonprofit that focuses on adult literacy, graduation equivalency, and English language services. And anything you buy from their bookstore, the profits go to free classes for adults in Indianapolis to promote literacy, which I think is really cool. They actually don't have a brick and mortar store right now. They're in the process of moving, and their new store in Fountain Square is under construction. So in the meantime, you can buy books from them via bookshop.org. If you haven't heard of bookshop.org, it is a very cool new website that has been called the Rebel Alliance to Amazon's Empire. It's a really easy online platform to use to buy books, but whenever you do buy books on the shop, you can either choose to send your profits to one particular bookstore, like I chose Indie Reads this time, or if you just buy books from the website in general, it goes into a pot of money that's then split among independent bookstores across the country, which is so cool. All right, so the first book I picked up from them was Makeup Breakup by Lily Menon. Now, I'm really excited about this book. Lily Menon is actually the pen name for Santiago Menon, who is one of my favorite young adult romance authors. I absolutely adore her books. They're some of my favorite YA romances ever. And this one is an adult romance, which is woohoo! I'm really excited. So this one is a hate to love romance that covers two app developers, one of whom runs an app that is described as the Google Translate for failing relationships, and the other runs an app that is the Uber for breakups. So I love me an enemies to lovers. This sounds so fun. She always writes such great female characters, and all of her chemistry in her books is magnificent. So I'm really excited to read this one. All right, the other book I picked up from Indie Reads via bookshop.org is African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song. This is edited by Kevin Young, who's the poetry editor at The New Yorker. And this looks like it is an exhaustive collection. It has those really thin pages. I love it. So it is organized chronologically. So it starts with Phyllis Wheatley and other enslaved or freed slave poets. And then it goes all the way through to contemporary poets like Danez Smith and Elizabeth Acevedo. So for every one poet that I recognize in this table of contents, there are 20 or 30 that I've never heard of before, which is really exciting. The only thing that I think that would have made this collection better for me was if there was an Amanda Gorman poem in it, but I was reading about it and it looks like this book was released just before Amanda Gorman rose to prominence, so I guess I'm just gonna have to buy her collection of poems when it comes out later this year. All right, I have a guest star. I was filming with the door closed, I promise, and he snuck in somehow. He's like, no, stop, I don't want this. Wow. Oh, he's sitting on his little seat over there now. That was really intense. All right, so the last set of books I have for you is a pretty big haul because I was able to physically go to a bookstore recently. I went to Irvington Vinyl and Books, and I swear to you, this bookstore was like tailor-made for me. I just think that it is heaven. It's run by a really cool girl named Alisha, and there's a cat named Violet who is everything, and there's a focus on queer writers and writers of color, and it is just my favorite place in the world. I love it. I spend way too much money there, and I'm excited to show you what I bought last time I was there. All right, so the first thing I picked up from Irvington Vinyl and Books is Shit Actually by Lindy West. Now, I love Lindy West. I love everything she writes. And in her last collection before this one, called The Witches Are Coming, she wrote an essay where she rewatched old Adam Sandler movies and just roasted them and ripped apart how obviously misogynistic they are because it's Adam Sandler films. And I think she took that format from that essay and turned it into an entire book. And the first essay in the book is called The Fugitive is the Only Good Movie. And that's my favorite action movie. And I am just so excited to read her takes on movies, even though it looks like she doesn't like Love Actually, which makes me a little sad, but that's okay. I'm excited to hear her take on modern film. All right, next up, I picked up two books by N.K. Jemisin, who is a fierce Black fantasy female writer that you should definitely know about if you didn't already. The first one is the 5th season, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. And if you read my blog, you might notice that this is a book that I've already read. The first time I read it was on Audible. It's narrated by the incredible Robin Miles. Please go listen to it. But my book club is reading it, so I thought that for the reread, I would pick up the physical copy, and because it's a different reading experience sometimes. So this book is friggin' incredible. This series is amazing. One of the best fantasy books of all time. It'll be remembered in history as part of the canon. And this series was record-breaking because N.K. Jemisin was the first writer to ever win the Hugo Award 3 years in a row. That's the top award for sci-fi and fantasy, and she won it with each book in this series, which is also rare for a sequel to win the Hugo Award. This takes place in a world called the Stillness, and it's a dystopian story in which the world just ends periodically. The world ends in all sorts of crazy ways. It's amazing. Highly recommend. Please read it. The other book I picked up by N.K. Jemisin is How Long Till Black Future Month, and this is a great title. It's such a great title. I've had my eye on this one for a long time. It's her short story collection, and it was the first book I saw when I walked into Irvington Vinyl and Books, so I felt like the universe was telling me that I just need to go ahead and buy it. All right, next up, I picked up 2 anti-racist nonfiction works. The first one is How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective. Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Combahee River Collective was a group of Black lesbian feminists in the 1970s who were the first group of people to really talk seriously about intersectionality and the ways in which the Black female experience and the Black lesbian experience were different than the experiences of other women. Lots of different writers that I've read, like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, all of these writers were influenced by the CRC. So I thought it was important to learn more about them. I did some research, and the reason it's called the Combahee River Collective is because the Combahee River was the river where Harriet Tubman did her famous raid where she was able to free like 700 and some slaves. So cool. The other nonfiction anti-racist book I was able to pick up is Just Us, An American Conversation by Claudia Rankine. Now, I say nonfiction, but Claudia Rankine sort of transcends any genre. She's a poet and a playwright in addition to being an essayist, and her books are just works of art. I read her book Citizen last year, and there's imagery, there's poetry, there's essays, and this one centers, I believe, on whiteness. And I was flipping through the book while I was scripting out this video to find an image that I wanted to show you. And I stumbled upon an image of a police officer from Plainfield, Indiana, which is horrifying, but not at all surprising. So I'm very excited to learn more about Rankine's take on whiteness. You know, always learning, always growing in my anti-racism. We're almost done with the books. The next one I have to show you is Paola, Santiago and the River of Tears by Tehlor K. Mejia. This is part of the Rick Riordan Presents series. Rick Riordan is a middle grade author famous for the Percy Jackson books, and everything that has his name on it is incredible. This series has focused on folklore from various other cultures. This one is about the old folktale La Llorona. It has a fierce Latinx young woman as its heroine. This young woman is apparently interested in STEM. It just sounds like everything I love, and I'm always looking for new books to recommend to my students, so I'm very excited to pick this one up. The next book I have to show you is Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the third and final book in the Daevabad trilogy, which is a Jinn and Middle Eastern folklore-inspired fantasy trilogy. I have not read this yet. I tend to like to wait until all 3 books in a trilogy are out and then marathon them, because otherwise I feel the need to reread them with every successive book, and who has time for that? One of my favorite booktubers, Reagan Peruse from Peruse Project, absolutely swears by this series, and she has never steered me wrong, so I'm excited to read this year. Also, look at this cover. It's beautiful. Okay, lastly, I picked up a new release They Removed by Brandon Hobson. This is about a family from the Cherokee Nation who are grieving their son, who it sounds like was killed in a police shooting. This is written by someone who is a part of the Cherokee Nation themselves. And I really, really want to learn more about American Indigenous writers this year. And this one sounds like it's also influenced by some Cherokee folklore, which means there might be some magical realism, which is one of my favorite things. So hopefully I get to pick this one up soon. All right, that is everything I have to show you today from my independent bookstore haul. I will leave information for the bookstores I mentioned today and for the titles that I mentioned today in the description down below. Please let me know in the comments if you have a favorite independent bookstore or if you have read any of these books. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more from me. And for now, that's all she read.